Good morning and welcome to my channel, Run Free and Strong. I'm Rayto. It's going to be a great day. Today, I'm going to share my painful journey with plantar fasciitis. Yep, one of the most painful and debilitating overuse injuries among runners. We'll travel a long road back from my injury last summer, including how I rehabbed, and very important, what did I learn from my injury. And guys, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave comments below. Before we dive into my plantar fasciitis experience, I do want to make a medical disclaimer. I'm sharing my personal experience as a runner who suffered a plantar fasciitis injury. Having said that, this video and its content are not intended as medical advice, nor am I a licensed medical professional. If you do suffer from a plantar fasciitis injury or any other injury, please consult with a medical expert. Having gotten that out of the way, let's talk about what is plantar fasciitis. For those of you who are not familiar with plantar fasciitis, consider yourself lucky. You're probably wondering, what is this all about? Plantar fasciitis is a common overuse injury among runners. It is the inflammation, irritation, or tear of the plantar fascia, a tissue that provides structural integrity to our longitudinal arch and stretches from our Achilles to our toes. Before I share my rehab journey, let me provide a little bit of background about my training. I have a little confession to make. Last spring and early summer, my training was all over the place. My weekly mileage fluctuated between 20 and 30 miles a week. Most of my runs were hard, including 2 track workouts and 1 tempo run a week. All my running was hard. To make matters worse, I did not stretch before or after runs. Yeah, once a week I lifted and did some core exercises. Add to that the fact that I'm a quad dominant runner with relatively weak glutes, tight hamstrings, and calves. And I have a history of stress reactions in my toes. I think you get the picture. Now we're in July of last year, and I diagnosed plantar fasciitis when my outer heel on my left foot started hurting and it became painful to walk or run. Coincidentally, I had a master's track meet scheduled for mid-July, and I was not going to let this injury interfere with my races. So I took off a week and then resumed training for the next 2 weeks, including a 10-mile long run and 400 repeats on the track. Bad idea. I went into the track meet injured and completely banged up. I competed in the mile and 800 meters at the Kinetic Nutmeg State Games in mid-July. As you can imagine, the brutal July heat, insufficient training, and my plantar fasciitis injury created the perfect race conditions for me. Not really. Bad idea. After the mile race, I could barely walk. After the 800, I struggled just to get back to my car and drive home. I was broken, literally. The next morning, I was unable to get out of bed and collapsed in pain on the bedroom floor. So let's talk about my rehab. I started my rehab that same day with rest, ice, and Advil. It was devastating. I stopped running and didn't run for 7 weeks. I would ice my heel and my fascia every 2 to 3 hours during the day. The Advil combined with the rest and the ice helped reduce the inflammation and the pain when I was not walking. In addition, I would gently stretch my fascia every morning before getting out of bed. Beyond the basics of rest, ice, and Advil, I would perform several exercises daily to stretch and strengthen my kinetic chain. From my foot to my ankle to my calves to my hamstrings to my glutes to my hip flexors and lower back. There were 2 sets of exercises I did. The first set of exercises are intended for my feet and my lower legs. There are 4 exercises in this set that I do in the comfort of my home and take about 15 minutes. All that's required is a small kitchen towel, a baseball or tennis ball, a Pro Stretch rocker that's available on Amazon for about $30, and a set of stairs. During my rehab, I perform these exercises up to 3 times per day. Let's take the next 3 minutes for me to demonstrate in this video how to do these exercises. Then we'll continue with the rest of my rehab.
I'm feeling.
The second set of exercises are designed for the entire kinetic chain and are based on Phil Wharton's active isolated flexibility methodology. Phil has worked with many well-known athletes, including Olympians. There are about a dozen exercises that I do in the comfort of my home and it takes me about 20 to 30 minutes. All that is required is a yoga mat and a 6-foot rope for stretching that can be bought at Home Depot. I do these exercises once per day. And when I started running again, I stretched after my runs. So let's talk about my changing footwear. I've used many different types of running shoes, from trainers to racing flats and even spikes from brands such as Nike, New Balance, Brooks, Asics, and so on. I wanted to continue with a neutral running shoe that was relatively light and had a low heel to toe drop. But I wanted a little bit more cushioning underfoot and go with a medium stack shoe rather than a low stack shoe. So I went from my go-to running shoes before my injury, the New Balance Fuel Cell Impulse, to these awesome Hoka One Kavu running shoes that have a higher stack than my New Balance. I'm happy to say I've put more than 1,700 miles over the past 12 months on several pairs of these with no injuries. These are my new go-to running shoes and I love them. Now that we've covered the basics of rest, ice, and Advil, as well as exercises to stretch and strengthen my kinetic chain and in changing footwear, let's talk about the final part of my rehab journey, starting the run again. After a 7-week break from running, I was really looking forward to my first run. On September 1st last year, I ran for 2 miles on the Waveney trails and it felt amazing. For the next 8 weeks, I slowly rebuilt my foundation and ran anywhere from 15 to 20 miles a week with usually 2 days off. At the end of that 8-week period, I built up to the point where I could do a 10-mile long run on the Waveney trails. By November, I continued my build up and increased to about 30 miles per week and added strides and hill repeats. As I mentioned, over the past 12 months, I've run about 1,700 miles with 0 injury. So what changes did I make with my training? First, I took a more conservative approach to building and sustaining both volume and quality of training. Second, I incorporated more strength in core work, especially kettlebell exercises to strengthen my glutes. Third, I added a pre-run routine consisting of lunges and leg swings. More stretching after runs to improve the flexibility of my kinetic chain. I'm doing more hill repeats and strides, which builds strength, speed, power, and improves running form. I'm slowly starting to reintegrate lactate threshold workouts after a year of training. But lesson learned, I will limit to 1 hard workout a week plus 1 long run per week. No more 3 hard workouts a week. To improve adaptation from my workouts, I'm taking at least 1 recovery day a week, usually on Monday after my Sunday long runs. If I don't feel good, I have no problem taking an additional day off. As many of you know, building the aerobic engine is the easy part, and maintaining the chassis so the car doesn't break down is the hard part. So after all that, what did I learn from my plantar fasciitis injury? 4 things. 1, it's the little things that matter. We should focus and commit to a holistic approach to running. That means do all the little things, from stretching to strengthening, to strides, to hydration, nutrition, to rest and recovery, including quality sleep, to mental and emotional health. Spend more time on all things, even at the expense of running. It'll pay off in the long run, and pun intended. 2, work on my weaknesses, not my strengths. Ask myself, what have I learned from my injuries? What can I do better and improve? As an example, I mentioned that I'm a quad dominant runner with relatively weak glutes. So what am I doing about that? I'll stretch more, incorporate kettlebell exercises into my strength training, and replace some workouts on flat ground with hill repeats, all designed to build my glutes. That's addressing a weakness. 3, hard days hard, easy days easy. You may have heard this before. Don't let ego get in the way. Don't let a type A personality take over. Not every workout has to be hard. Taking easy days easy will enable me to run hard days hard without increasing injury risk. And easy means easy. It's okay to run slow. Finally, number 4, consistency is key to continuous improvement and achieving our ultimate goals. Without consistent training, we will fall short. Injuries interrupt our training and our progress. They keep us from our goal. Hey guys, hopefully sharing my journey with plantar fasciitis will help you reflect on your own running experience and how to overcome injury and adversity, and the importance to learn and change and become a better runner.